Welcome back to another part of the Grading Quick Start. In this lesson, we're going to talk about managing zeros. So zeros, what does it mean? Well, when you think about grading, zero should mean the absence of evidence of learning. It should mean that the student hasn't learned anything at all. I mean, that's what zero means when we talk about it in other scenarios. $0 in your pocket means you don't have any money. Zero time means that you have run out of time. Zero learning, though, I can't think of a time when a student entered a classroom and didn't learn anything. So zeros have an inherent issue that they're inaccurate. You know, the other thing about zeros is they tend to be pretty demotivating. So the issue with zeros, again, seldom has a student learn nothing. Even by accident, they're going to learn something. So they're not going to give us a measure of our students' performance. Zeros in the typical grade scale are demotivating. They tend to be very hard to overcome. When we have a zero, for instance, we all know what happens when you have two tests and one is a 0 and one is 100. You look like you've only learned 50% of the material when in fact the story isn't being told by the averages. So when we have outlier grades like zeros, they tend to punish students. They tend to lower grades. And that often is something that causes students to give up because they can't recover from it. Students know that when you get a 0 on any high stakes assignment, the chance of passing the class is just dropped and it might be all gone altogether. So zeros, when we use them in an average for overall grades, tend to punish our students and leave them with no chances of success. So that's the problem with zeros. So there are some alternatives to zeros. So two things that you could do and set as part of your grading policy is one, you could choose not to give zeros and instead give incompletes. So if you give an incomplete, and we're not talking about for the end of the course grade, but I'm talking about, they're supposed to have handed in a paper on Monday and it's Monday and it's not there. What you could choose to do is instead of recording the 0, is you could have them meet with you and come up with a contract where you go over what is missing, you discuss why it might be missing, and set up what you expect from them, the date that you expect the next stage to be turned in, and where you expect them to go for help, like the tutoring center, the writing center, a teaching assistant, a graduate assistant, a faculty member, etc. In this contract, they should agree in writing. I often have my students email me these contracts with the deliverables that I expect broken into smaller chunks. For instance, if a student's having a problem with a paper, I'm going to usually assume that if they really are struggling with it, it's not because they don't want to, but it's because something is causing them difficulties. So we break it into smaller chunks that are more manageable. This is going to give them a chance to succeed and to build their confidence instead of staring at this large paper thinking, wow, I can't do it. Well, maybe today all I'm going to ask you to do is write the introductory paragraph. Maybe tomorrow I would like you to write the next 2 and send me the references sheet. Staging it in a contract isn't letting them off the hook. In fact, it's providing them structure and avoiding that 0, which is going to, on our online system, drop their grade probably into the failing range. Another thing that you can do, another alternative to dealing with zeros, is to worry about, to avoid counting behavior into your grades. So, for instance, in my writing course, if I expect all students to hand in their work on time, and I do expect that, I also know reasonably that there are going to be students who don't. Do I penalize them for not turning it in on time? If it doesn't honestly matter if I have it today or Monday or Wednesday, maybe I don't actually want to put that into the grade at all. Maybe I'm just going to assess their performance. And maybe I'll make a note on whether or not they had it in on time. I'll make a note on things that they need to be concerned about, and I'll include that in my feedback. But when it comes to the actual work itself, I'm going to grade it based on the work that they produced. So that's another alternative to 0, is to actually remove behavior so that you have a little bit more room to work with your students and meet them where they are. Now, a simple strategy for dealing with zeros is considering dropping that lowest grade. So if you give 8 quizzes during your semester, you might choose to drop the lowest grade. There are faculty who feel that concern about that worry that this is going to create grade inflation, or it's going to, I'm trying to think how to say it, or it's going to cause students to be willing to do shoddy work. That's actually not true. A study by McDermott in 2013 found that when you dropped a grade, it doesn't demotivate the students at all. In fact, students tend to increase their performance when they get to the final exam. For some reason, having the chance to drop a grade, and not all students are going to need this. In fact, many students won't. But just having that possibility seems to not take away from their studying overall, and maybe it even lowers their anxiety so that they can learn a little bit better. In terms of grade inflation, most students tend to cluster very closely on their performance. But for students who do have a bad day, and every one of us is going to have a bad day, it prevents that 1 out of 8 moments from affecting their overall performance. Again, that tends to motivate them too, because they realize that one mistake does not define their entire academic career in your class. So that's a very simple strategy that you really don't need much to do to know. You just have to say, we have 8 quizzes, we're going to drop the lowest one. So that's another strategy. Now, something that's not quite as simple is using minimal grading. So minimal grading is not something that we talk about a lot, but it does deal with one of our concerns as faculty. We both know that when you have 2 tests, and one is a 0 and one is 100, the average becomes a 50. The problem with that is it doesn't tell the story of what the students learned. It doesn't tell you the story of the student's ability level, and frankly, all 50s are not the same, even though they look at it when you have to record a final grade. So in a minimal grading scheme, what we do is we take away the 0 point and we replace it with something else like a 50. Now, a 50 on our scale is an F. It is a failing mark. But by eliminating the 0, what we're doing is protecting students who may dip down or are at the end of the range, at the lower end of the passing range, from a lot of harm if they happen to get one very bad grade. So let me give you an example of this. So a student who tends to pull 70s, so they get a 70 on one test and a 75 on another, suddenly gets a 40 or a 20. They had a very bad day. Those grades are really going to hurt them. Or they get a 0. Those grades are going to affect their average so significantly, their chance of success in your class is really, really gone. But by replacing it with a 50, it doesn't do the same kind of damage. It doesn't skew their score the same way that a 0 does. Now, you might be concerned that using minimal grading like this is going to lead to grade inflation. However, there was a study done by Carafio and Carey in 2009, and when they looked at minimal grading, they found that minimal grading doesn't help students who don't perform. If a student is always getting under a 50, bumping them to a 50 is not going to make them pass the class. What this is going to do is give you a better read on those students who are at the lower end of the passing range, who are more in danger of having one lower grade completely eliminate an entire semester's worth of work. Now, minimal grading is a little bit controversial. There is still an open debate on whether or not this should be used, and students themselves may even have some mixed feelings about it. But I'm presenting it here as an option for you, something to think about. Do you want to set a threshold so that no matter what a student does, as long as they hand in, they might still get an F, but a 0F and a 50F numerically are going to be very different. So these are just some ideas of how to handle zeros. So we'll see you back for another lesson shortly. Thank you.